Welcome to Elimu TV, where you watch and learn. I am a teacher, Madam Christine Okot, taking you through the 8th lesson of Biology Form 3, and today we are going to start on Kingdom Animalia, and our subtopic for today is going to be Arthropoda. So welcome, viewer. So let us have a preview of what you're going to learn today in this lesson. First, we're going to review what we learned on the last lesson. We're going to look at the general characteristics of organisms that belong to Kingdom Animalia. We're going to look at the phylum which we have in the Kingdom Animalia. And today we're going to deal specifically with Arthropoda. And lastly, I'm going to give you an assignment. So on last lesson, we were talking about, we are still reviewing on the plant kingdom. We talked about all the phylum of the plant kingdom, so we are done with the plant kingdom. So today we are going to exclusively deal on Kingdom Animalia, and our first phylum is going to be on Arthropoda. So let us look at the general characteristics of organisms that belong to the animal kingdom. So the first characteristic is all the organisms that belong to Kingdom Animalia are multicellular. This means that they exist in multiple of cells. So multi means many. So they exist in a colony or multiple of cells. So many of the cells are the ones which make up an organism. So we have an example in our illustration of cells, many of them which have been combined that form an organ system. Then another characteristic of Kingdom Animalia is they have eukaryotic cells. Eukaryotic cells mean that these are cells that have true nuclear membrane. If you look at our illustration, where the nuclear is located, there's a membrane surrounding the nuclear. So all the organisms that belong to this kingdom, they have a true nuclear. Then they also have other organelles which have membrane, like the mitochondrium, illustrated also in our diagram there. Moving forward to still general characteristics of animal, the animals are heterotrophic. Heterotrophic means that these animals are not in position to make their own food because they do not have the green pigment, which is chlorophyll, which is responsible for the process of photosynthesis. This is the opposite in plants. Plants have the green pigment, that means they are in position to make their own food. So these animals will depend on plants and other organisms so that they can take in the nutrients. So heterotroph means that these are organisms who are not in position to make their own food, but they rely on other plants or they feed on other animals to get their source of nutrient. Another general characteristic is that the animals, when you look at the structure of their cells, they do not have a cell wall, they do not have a cell sap, and they also do not have a chloroplast. So in plants, it is opposite. Plants have a cell wall, whereas the animals do not have. The cell walls in plant is made by a substance which we call cellulose, which is absent in animal cell. Chloroplast is responsible for the process of photosynthesis. So in animals, because we have said that animals are heterotrophs, so it means they do not have that pigment. And in addition, also, they do not have the cell sap. If you look at our illustration, you can see the diagram of an animal cell. There is no chloroplast which is present. There is no cell wall or any cell sap. So that is among the characteristics. Moving forward, another characteristic is in terms of locomotion. Locomotion means that this is movement of an organism from one position to another. So most animals have the ability to move. They show rapid movement when compared to plants and other organisms. If we can remember when we talked about the plants, we say that plants are in position to move, but they move very slowly. So in animals, there are various ways in which the animals can move. Some of them can crawl, like we have an illustration there of a caterpillar. We have a bat that can swim. We have organisms or animals like the monkeys, the human beings. They use the legs or their limbs to walk. So animals move in various ways. So we have different features that help animals to move. In terms of reproduction, mainly in animals, the reproduction is sexual. That means there must be a fusion of an egg cell and a sperm cell. So reproduction is sexual. There must be a fusion of an egg cell and a sperm cell. As in our illustration there, we have an egg cell, then the sperm cell will fuse in the egg cell, then they form something we call a zygote. Then from there, that is where development takes place. Still looking at the general characteristics of animals, in terms of their habitat, they occupy so many habitats. Some of them are aquatic. For example, the animals which are found in the seas, the fish, the dolphins, the whales. Some of them live on land, like the humans, the chimpanzees, the monkeys. There are some which are aerial. So there are some which are aerial, that is like the birds. They most of the time they spend in trees or somewhere, but not on the land. So the habitats, this is a difference because they occupy different habitats. Not all organisms will be found in one ecosystem or in one habitat. In terms of their cells are differentiated into tissues, then organisms, then the organ system. We say the basic unit of life is what we call a cell. From a cell, that is when an organism will develop, because from a cell will create a tissue. Then when tissues, they work, most of them doing the same function, they will form what we call an organ. In our illustration, we have an example. We have a muscle cell. So many muscle cells will combine together to form what we call a tissue. And in this instance, we have a muscle tissue. Then the muscle tissues will form together, many of them to form an organ, which in this case we call a heart. A heart will form a system, an organ system, which we call the circulatory system. And in a circulatory system, it's one of the main component or the main system that makes up the part of a human being. So many organ system will make an organism. So you can see from the basics, the cells, which are the basic unit of life, they end up forming an organism, which is either a plant or an animal. And in this case, we are talking about the animals. So we have different types of organ system that make up an organism. That one we're talking about in particular of a human being. For example, we have the skeletal system. This one mainly provides structure to the body and protects the internal organs. So we have the skeleton there. It is the internal. Human beings, we have what we call the internal skeleton system. That is different from what we have in insects. They have the exoskeletal. Then we move to another system which is found in human bodies. We have the muscular system. The muscular system, its main function is to support the body and allow the body to move. So the muscles that we have in our body, they support the body and allow us to move from one direction to the other. Then we have another very important organ system we call the digestive system. The digestive system, its sole purpose is to break down food and absorb its nutrients. So when we take up this food, there's a system that works its way so that the food can be broken down, and that protein or that carbohydrate that you have taken it can be absorbed and utilized in other parts of the body. Then we have another system we call the respiratory system. Its main function is to take in oxygen and release waste gases. Another important organ system that found in the human system is what we call the nervous system. Just from the name, you know it's about the nerves. So the nervous system is it controls sensations, the thoughts, movements, and all other body activity. So its main purpose is to coordinate and to make other activities take place in our body. Then our final organ system that we have in the human beings is what we call the circulatory system. So from the word circulatory, you have an idea that its work is to circulate something. So what is this something that it circulates? So it ensures that there's transport of oxygen, the nutrients and other substances to the cells, and it carries away the waste product. So this is just a summary of the organ systems that we have in a human. So today we are talking about the kingdom Animalia. We have several phylum which are found in the Animalia. So number one, we have the Porifera, we have the Cnidaria, we have the Platyhelminthes, we have the Nematodas. The other phylum, we have the Annelida, we have the Arthropoda, molluscs that composed of the snails. We have the Echinodermata, and the biggest of all is we have Chordata, that one which comprises of all the mammals, the reptiles, the fish, and the birds. So on the kingdom Animalia, we have 9 major animal phylums. So today we are going to exclusively talk about Arthropoda. So let us look at the characteristics that make an organism to qualify to be called or to be in the kingdom, in the phylum Arthropoda. So number one, their bodies are made of segments. They have segmented body parts. If you look at our illustration there, we have an example of an arthropoda. The bodies are made using segment. There's a different segment for the head, then for the abdomen and other parts of the body. Then we also have the jointed appendages, which they use for movement. We have they also have a hard external skeleton. We can also call it an exoskeleton. If you look at that organism, or maybe if you look at a cockroach, when you take the cockroach and hold it in your hand and you try to crush it, you will realize it has a very hard outer skin. So that outer skin is what we call the exoskeleton, and is exclusively made of a substance which we call chitin. So chitin is found in the exoskeleton of the arthropoda. Then another characteristics of arthropodas, they have 3 parts, that is the head, the thorax, and the abdomen. That is with the exception of the arachnids. The arachnids have 2 body parts. So all of them, they have 3 body parts except the arachnids. Then another characteristics of the arthropods, they do the molting. Molting means the shading of the exoskeleton, and they secrete a larger one, which is very vulnerable. So after a time elapsed during a certain duration, they will shed off the outer exoskeleton, then another one will develop. So let us look at the characteristics of the arthropodas one by one. So the first one, we say they have bilateral symmetry. So by bilateral symmetry, it means that when you take any organism which is found on arthropoda, when you subdivide it or you cut it into 2, it will give you 2 body parts which are the same. So an example, we have a beetle there. When you cut it into 2, the first part will be equal to the other part. So that is what we mean by having a bilateral symmetry. Bi meaning 2. So when you cut into 2, they will give you half segments which are the same. So they also have the muscles for movement which are attached to the exoskeleton. We've talked about the exoskeleton, which is made of a substance we call the chitin. Another characteristics, they have a fluid-filled cavity which is called the hymocoel. So under the arthropoda, they are still subdivided into 5 different classes. The first one being Diplopoda. From the word di, you know it means 2. So we have Chilopoda, we have the Insecta, so this one comprises of all the insects. We have another class we call the Crustacea, and finally we have the Arachnida. So under Arthropoda we have 5 classes, and we're going to talk today about Diplopoda. We're going to learn about Diplopoda. So what are the main characteristics of Diplopoda? So these are organisms with 2 pairs of legs per segment. Di, that means 2. So per every segment that we have, looking at our illustration there, so per every segment that we have 2 pairs of the legs. So they are also called double-footed organisms. So we have various species of millipedes. So looking at their specific characteristics, number 1, they have elongated cylindrical bodies. If you look at our illustration, their bodies are in a form of a cylinder, then they are elongated. Number 2, their bodies are divided into main parts. That is, we have the head, then we have the trunk, which is segmented. If you look at our illustration, you can locate where the head is, where there's also an antennae. Then the other trunk is that the other body part, which is made of segments. Then each body segment has 2 pairs of legs, with the exemption of the first thoracic segment. So the first thoracic segment, after the head, you have that first segment. That one will just have 1 pair of leg. So the other segments after the thoracic segment, they will have 2 pairs of leg per each segment. Still looking at the characteristics of Diplopoda, they also have a pair of antennae. They may have a simple or a compound eye. At times, there is no eye which is present in them. In terms of breathing, they have very small pores along their bodies, which we call the spiracles. So those ones are found on each side of the segment. So that is where they take in oxygen and take out carbon dioxide. Then another characteristics of Diplopoda, they are herbivorous. That means they cannot make their own food, but they depend on plants. So most of them feed on plants. In terms of respiration, you've talked about the spiracles. So that is an illustration showing the spiracles. So those are the small pores that are found on the body segments. So they take in oxygen and take out carbon dioxide through those pores which are found on the segments. So for protection, there are also organisms. So when they are irritated, they need to have a system that will help them or protect them. So among the characteristics of living things, there's something we call sensitivity or irritability. So in each organism, there's a way or there's a mechanism in which an organism can protect itself from harm. So these Diplopodas, they also have a system in which they protect themselves. So what do? They discharge a foul-smelling or a toxic chemical to the predator. Then there's some of the chemicals produced by various species. They include hydrogen cyanide and hydrochloric acid. So the millipedes secrete secretions, they produce reactions to human. We say this is a mechanism of protection. So they can either emit the hydrogen cyanide or the hydrochloric acid. Hydrochloric acid, just from the name, it is acidic in nature. So it must have an impact on the predator or the enemy it's trying to protect itself from. So some of the compounds are known to burn the skin, or they cause discoloration lasting for more than a month. So that is how they protect themselves from any harm. So when you're talking about protecting themselves, so they can that chemical which they emit, hydrogen cyanide and hydrochloric acid, it can either burn the skin, like in our illustration there. So that is an example of burnt skin from the release of the millipedes. So that one is an example there. You can see the skin is burnt. So that is a form of a protective mechanism. Then it can also cause the discoloration of the skin. That is an example of a discolored skin. A discolored skin caused by the emission of the millipedes, because we said they either emit the hydrogen cyanide or the hydrochloric acid. So that has been our lesson for today. I hope you have learned something about the arthropodas and specifically about the Diplopoda. So for your assignment today, question number 1, the chemical what is the chemical released by millipedes are composed of which compound? So you state the compounds which are released by the millipedes. There are 2 of them, we've just discussed about them. Then question number 2, name the 5 classes of arthropoda, and in each class at least state at least 5 examples of organisms which are found in the class. So that has been our lesson for today. Remember, you can write to us if you have any question, any feedback, any clarification you'd like us to respond to. Our Facebook page is Elimu TV. Our Twitter handle is at Elimu_KE. And our SMS number is 22518. Thank you very much for watching. See you in the next lesson.